Alright, get ready for something that's really funny. Kings following the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia thought they didn't have enough power.
No, 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 no.
Alright, so right after the 30 Years' War came Kings Louis XIV and Frederick of Prussia. Both of them wanted to create something called an absolute rule. Just to define this term, it means that they wanted complete sovereignty over the entire country. Oh, hello. The pretentious word of today is sovereignty. Sovereignty, having complete and utter rule over your people. The reason for the pretentious word of the day is because historians like using douchey words to sound smarter than you. Don't worry, you're not stupid. They're just assholes. Now, they did have power before, they just wanted more of it. Because of feudalism in the Middle Ages, kings only partially owned things. And by partially, it'd be like saying that Tyrion Lannister is only partially a midget. Something to keep in mind, too, is this magical thing called the divine right of kings. Basically, kings thought that because they were kings, it was because God wanted them to be there, so they deserved everything. But there were 4 things that kings had to get rid of to conquer their people even more so. The nobility, the church, the townspeople, and the landowners. Number 1, the church. Now, what the 30 Years' War was a bunch of religious sects killing each other over the fact of who would make the best religious sect in Europe. For Americans, something to keep in mind is that there's no concept of separation of church and state at this time, and they were wholly together. The churches also had something going on for them that was quite interesting, is they also had control of the universities at the time. Because of their control in the universities, they can control the education, and so the king wanted to control the education system so he can brainwash the people into believing what he thought was right. So with the nobility, things were a tad bit different. The king owned all of the land, except he couldn't get everywhere as fast as he can because they didn't have planes, trains, cars, etc. Back then, the king had to have wealthy people control those areas for him. Basically, they would rule the areas that are too far away for the king to access. He could visit them time to time again, find out what's going on, but he didn't have the ability to just rule them flat out. And he gave them the land, so in return, he just asked that they swear fealty back to him. In other words, they have to go to war when he wants them to. So the king was pissed, not drunk, because he wanted to have complete control over the entire army. Because how it was before is that he kind of controlled the nobles who kind of controlled their people, and it was just a hierarchy of kind of control. And a lot of times when they went to war, they would bail and not even bother getting involved. The reason for this, too, is that if they think they're going to lose, there's no reason for them to fight, so they don't have to fight for the king, because he's going to die off in the fight anyway. Example. During the 100 Years' War, Burgundy actually decided to fight with the British for a little bit because they didn't like the king very much in France. The other part of this as well is castles. So, just in case the king got a little handsy with the wife, nobles had castles that they can flee into and fight off an invading army from the king because the king was kind of being an ass. 3 is the knights or the landowners. They actually decided whether or not to be taxed or if the taxes were fair. And to be completely honest, I don't know why they ever would say, like, yes, tax me, but they did for some reason. The main point behind this is that they had representatives to go and say to the king whether or not his taxes were fair, which took away power from him because he could be told that he's not doing a right thing. And the last part of the segment is the towns and cities. So you'd be surprised as to why the king actually had an issue with towns and cities. The reason why is because back then it kind of functioned similar to how the US government functions, in which states can make laws, but the federal government doesn't have to make the same laws. That's why marijuana is illegal in most states, minus Colorado and Washington. I think California and a few others now are part of that too. If you look at, say, England, up in York, they can have different laws than they have in Oxford area because people have different cultures there. They have different languages, they have different belief systems. So it is slightly different. And so the laws would change according to that. And normally before this, the king would actually just let that happen because it made the people happy. So the kings during the time period wanted to get rid of all of the people's privileges during this time period because of, again, absolutism. A really good way to think of this word is absolutism, absolute rule. It's basically it. It's a very straightforward definition. And so this is the overall view that you'll need to know for the CLEP exam, so I would recommend knowing that. If you are interested in studying more, specifically the people, I'm going to go into that in a minute, but if you feel like you got this concept, you can just go on to the next video. So one of the first absolutists that we'll be discussing is Louis XIV, the Sun King. Just to be forewarned, I will butcher my French pronunciations terribly, so just bear with me. Something to understand that's kind of important about the French kings prior to Louis XIV is that they're pussies. The perfect representation of this is this symbol right here, also known as the fleur-de-lis, the lily flower. So just like many other kings in France, Louis's dad, Louis, was also a pussy. And right after Louis was born, Louis died off a few years later. Speaking to which, Louis XIV was a huge mama's boy. Not Oedipus level, but pushing that border just a little bit. Keep in mind, too, that this is not typical of people in the nobility at the time. People didn't really care for their kids. So eventually, on Louis XIV's birthday, his daddy died, making him king. Well, not really, actually. So his mom decided to rule for him, who was also ruled by Cardinal Mazarin. Now, even though Cardinal Mazarin wasn't the technical ruler, he still was the ruler at the time. So fast forward a little bit, there was this rebellion against Cardinal Mazarin called Le Fronde, or I think it's called like the slingshot or something like that. Basically what it was is that nobles and townspeople alike got really fed up with the Cardinal Mazarin ruling everything, and they rebelled against him. Louis XIV, when he was a little kid, saw this and decided, yo, I don't want to be involved. This is where he gets his absolutism from. When Louis XIV actually eventually became king, he changed his symbol to the sun because he thought he was hot. Well, that's actually not why. He wanted it to be a symbol of waking up to the morning to the great Sun King. Ah. So the first thing he did to be an absolutist is he never appointed a first minister. This would be the equivalent of a president not having a cabinet or like Congress or a judiciary. Basically, he just wanted to get rid of everybody so he can have all the power for himself. To put in perspective, let me just go over some quotes from Louis XIV. L'État c'est moi. I'm the state. Un roi, une loi, une foi. I think. It means one king, one law, one faith. Just so you can put into perspective about how much of a narcissist this guy really was, he would make nobles serve him. If the nobles refused to do this, he kind of just started to have one of those notebook dementia stories in which he just forgot completely who the person was. Additionally, to piss off the people called the sword nobles, or the original nobles, he invented his new form of noble, called robe nobles. But basically the way he did this is he didn't actually give them away like a normal nobility would be, or a family line. He sold them. This basically created a side revenue for Louis XIV to have, which basically funded his wars. It did create an economic hole for future generations that was so bad that it actually was impossible to recover from, and that's why the French Revolution happened, but that's a topic for another video. So in creating the new nobles, he actually took down the old nobility by making it more spread out and more diverse. In addition to that, the Estates General was disenfranchised and wasn't reset up again until 1789. If that year sounds familiar, it's because it's the French Revolution. The next part is the Code de Louis, or the I'm better than you laws. Basically, what this was a set of nationalized laws in order to create power all for himself and none of it for the people. And later on, Louis XIV revoked the Edict of Nantes. This basically allowed people to practice a different religious sect. So they got rid of those and they became all Catholic. Yeah, it's fun. Louis XIV believed in this thing called Galatianism, which is where the Pope is the spiritual authority over the church, except he can't tell the French king what to do when it comes to religion. It's kind of similar to what Henry VIII did in that he broke away from the church in a slight way, not as extreme as Henry VIII, and he also didn't kill off all his wives or divorce them. No, instead he just porked like 11 women and had kids with like all of them. One of them actually had more kids than his own wife did. And his last words were, "I'm leaving you, but the state remains forever." Or until 1789. Some cool things, I guess, about his life is he built the Palace of Versailles. That's pretty much it, to be honest. He did create the catalyst that eventually led to the French Revolution by making more and more powerful kings throughout the years following him to the French Revolution. Next that we have is the Prussian Absolutists. Just a real quick geography lesson before we get started with this. Prussia and Russia are different things. Prussia is basically what a modern-day northeastern Germany and western Poland would be. It's also the foundations of Germany before Germany actually became Germany. So the Absolutists in Prussia were actually known as the Hohenzollern dynasty, or the Fredricks. You can pretty much just memorize Frederick because all of their names are Frederick, all 4 of them. In this video, though, I'm only going to talk about one of them, also known as the Soldatenkönig, or the Soldier King, Frederick William I. So Prussia under Fred Will was a militaristic power. To understand how much of a military power Prussia was the 12th largest in population, but the 4th largest military in Europe. Now, if anybody's familiar with either Sparta or, like the movie 300, it was considered the Sparta of the North, and that was just because they focused so much on military. Because in Prussia, it wasn't a job to be a part of the military, it was an honor. So Fred Will, the first thing he did was he banned comedies, operas, basically anything that wasn't promoting the military in some way, shape, or form. And he believed that he had more of a moral focus on God than on sexual desire. Let me just read you one of his quotes real quick. All successful rulers keep God before their eyes and have no mistresses, or rather, whores, and lead a godly life. Okay, so here's another one. The most beautiful girl or woman in the world would be a matter of indifference to me, but tall soldiers, they're my weakness. Shit, okay, hold on. Okay, I just looked it up. No, he wasn't gay. He just had more interest in war than sex, apparently. I don't know, I'm gonna stick with that he was gay. So his gayness is actually further encapsulated by the concept of the Potsdam Giants. What these people were basically the showmen of the military. They were almost always freakishly tall and never Prussian. So Fred Will basically hired a bunch of people to go get tall men from all over Europe to be in his army. He was into tall European men, I guess, is the point of this. Never actually claimed to be gay, and I don't think that's really important anyway, but I mean, I'm reading it right now. I think he is gay. So something that he did that was kind of opposite than Louis XIV was he created religious sects for everybody. Instead of all focusing in on one thing, he let everybody unite over the fact that they were Prussian and in the military. He then reduced the power of the legislative bodies by enforcing taxation on decree. And less pretentious wording, that means he decided to tax people whenever he wanted to. Then with the education part of the problem. He actually did create the first education system in which kids were required to go to school. However, nobles were blessed enough to be able to go to a military academy in which they would learn all the ways of being in the military. Plain and simple, what this did is it kept people in line. When you're the one educating them, then they're not going to rebel against you because they're taught from birth that you're amazing. Again, this is a constant theme throughout history. It's what Hitler did with the Hitler Youth and the BDM. In the simplest form I can explain this, you have to brainwash your people for you to be able to maintain power. And that is it for the absolutist rulers. There's actually plenty more, but I'm only going to be able to go over 2 for this video. If you want more information about any of the other absolutists, you can look up the other Fredericks of Prussia, because there's 3 of them. Both Peter the Great and Catherine the Great did a bunch of stuff as well. And then Joseph II of the Holy Roman Empire. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to see more content. I post frequently, but also sporadically. So if you are interested in keeping up to date,